My personal experience was I was opposed to the war before it started, and I was actually serving as a medic in a medical unit. And in January of 2003, a couple months before the war started, I was informed that I'd been involuntarily transferred to a military police unit. My job had been changed from medic to military police, and I was to report the following day, and they were being deployed. And for me, of course, that was a shock and that was unexpected. But when I got to the unit and saw people that I had known before from being in the National Guard at that point for 7 years, I really felt like there weren't a lot of options but to go. And so that's how I found myself in Iraq. And so it wasn't a moment when I said, oh, now I'm against the war. I had always been against it, but I'd never known what an occupation looked like from the point of view of an Iraqi civilian or from a soldier's point of view. And from my experience, I saw that the occupation was really brutalizing the Iraqi people and really destroying the souls not only of the Iraqis but of the US soldiers themselves. Just the day after day, violence, brutality, grinding down of humanity, really.
I'm sorry, you said at first you were a medic. Now, does that mean you're like a nurse or a doctor or in some capacity like that?
A medic in the military is essentially the same thing as an EMT, so it's first responder.
Yeah.
But in Iraq, I was military police.
Which is a very different assignment.
Right. Military police is much different than a medic. You know, the majority of my training and when I'd been stationed in Colorado with the National Guard, I'd always been a medic. And then when I was deployed overseas twice, actually in '99 and 2000, I was deployed to Hungary and Croatia in support of the mission in Bosnia. And that deployment, I was also deployed as military police. And then in Iraq, I was military police. And you know, it's two very different things, and one of the reasons why I joined the military in 1996 was to get medical training. I was a biology student, had thought about going into public health or physical therapy or something healthcare related, and so being a medic really made sense to me. Being a military police, on the other hand, didn't, and the job was a lot different. It was mostly patrols, escorting convoys, Kellogg Brown and Root convoys from one military base to the next, and going throughout the cities and on the streets every day, interacting with crowds of Iraqi civilians and trying to keep them away from these contracted vehicles, keep them out of the roads so that U.S. military and contracted convoys could drive through. And so from my experience, I saw a lot of the day-to-day impact that the occupation had in southern Iraq.
I've seen several accounts of harassment for female soldiers in Iraq. The accounts where some of the women were saying that they no longer even went to the latrine at night because they were afraid to go out because of, you know, the possibility of being attacked by their own, you know, their own comrades, basically. Can you? I'm not asking you about your own personal stuff here, but I mean, is there anything? Is that how serious or how prevalent is that? Would you say?
Well, when you're part of the female minority in the military, and especially in a place like Iraq where you're isolated, the only contact you have with other people is with other people in the military. And then, of course, you might come into contact with Iraqi civilians, but you can't really interact with them. So you spend your time with a majority of men in this military mentality, which already the military has a lot of instances of sexual harassment, rape, sexual assault, discrimination, just anywhere you are in the military. But then when you're deployed into a war zone like Iraq, all of that becomes magnified because violence becomes an everyday reality from the time a patrol leaves the base in the morning or, you know, whenever, any time of the day. On patrol, you're always confronted with violence. And then when you come back to the base, it's not something you just let go of. And so how I felt when I was in Iraq is definitely that the feeling that you're not safe no matter where you are, whether you're on base or off base, is a reality for many women in the military. When we first got to Kuwait before the war started, we were told that a man had been hiding in the women's showers with his gas mask on and jumping out and trying to attack women if they went by themselves to the showers. So we were told that we had to go to the showers in groups. When we got to Iraq, at one point, the base that we were stationed on, it was an air base, so there are a lot of roads out in the desert, and we'd go running on them. And we were told at one point that a woman was attacked while she was running by herself, so that women couldn't run by themselves anymore. When we were at another base in Kuwait, my friend and I were walking back to our tents after dark, and she had stepped around the corner, and a military police vehicle rolled up, and they said, "Hey, you can't be by yourself. Don't you know women aren't supposed to be by themselves after dark?" And so it wasn't even a feeling, it was a fact that you knew that women had been attacked. You maybe didn't know them. I mean, luckily for me, I wasn't aware of any women in my unit who'd been attacked, but it was something that you were always on the lookout. And also the fact that, you know, you're staying in these big, for us, we stayed in tents, so we're in these big tent cities, not just around the men in our unit whom we knew, but also around people that we didn't know from other units. And if you wanted to call home, which you always usually called home at night because of the time difference, you'd have to walk a mile to the phone tents in the dark. And so there was always that kind of suspicion and just uneasiness. And then, you know, I know a lot of women who've been in the military who have been sexually assaulted, both in Iraq and back in the U.S. on military bases. And another thing that I feel is specific to women in the military is just women's health care and having access to women's specific health care needs, which is very diminished when you're in Iraq. In fact, one thing that I recently found out that I feel very strongly about is that women in the military physicians cannot prescribe emergency contraceptives to women or to military dependents. So that means if you're deployed in Iraq and you're raped, you cannot be, the military does not have emergency birth control to prescribe to you the next day, so you have no way of preventing pregnancy after a sexual assault, after, you know,
by what authority is it, you know?
Well, it's
the presidential thing, or
yeah, it's
DOD, or
it's DOD regulation, and that was changed in 2002, I believe. So and now the reauthorization for the defense spending bill is coming up, so this is becoming an issue of allowing for funding for emergency contraceptive. It's just like very, and I have a friend who was deployed in Iraq during the very beginning of the war. She accidentally got pregnant, and her unit's reaction was, "Oh, well, we're just going to send you home. You have your abortion, you know, it's just a medical procedure like anything else, and then you get right back here and get right back to work. And, you know, if you don't return right away, you're going to be in trouble because you're basically abandoning your squad and your group." And so just things like this, like there was a woman in my unit who got pregnant right before the deployment. She stayed home, she terminated the pregnancy, and about halfway through our deployment, a little more than halfway, she got brought back over to Iraq to join the unit. And she was a single mother of 2 children. She'd been divorced, so she had 2 kids back home. She had to find someone to take care of them, and got over to Iraq. And one of the first things that her commander, our platoon leader, said to her is, "Oh, so hey, I heard you got the first confirmed kill in the unit." That this is something that an officer, a commanding officer, one of 2 highest ranking officers in our platoon, said to this young woman who had been through God knows what and had to leave her 2 children behind to come and join this unit where you're supposed to, what keeps you going is supposed to be that camaraderie and that connection with your fellow brothers and sisters, and this is how she's treated. And things like that just are allowed to happen, and people don't stand up. And so, you know, I think women in the military and women in combat, it's an issue that, you know, if we're not being supported by our chain of command, then we have to support each other, but it's very difficult to do that.